Do oh, son to say Albertville. Welcome back to my channel. Now, this video I was originally gonna release during the election breakdown, but it didn't really fit into the whole vibe overall because it's more of a breakdown of ideology rather than the individual people, and also didn't really completely just apply to all local politics, but overall. Now, it's not really a breakdown of liberalism or conservatism, but mainly the root cause of the generational age and like the past being idealized and then the future and modern era being idealized. So this is the problem with the old and the new. Now, back in the beginning of Albertville, not just the past that is remembered today, but way back, Albertville was a very wild wilderness, even among, the whole Sand Mountain region was really undeveloped, unused, and just open wilderness, even among the peoples who lived here, at least for a long time. Some archaeology sites may reveal the Moonite people actually built massive cities up here or something. But either way, during the times of the first settlers in Albertville, the Albert family and a few others, the Cherokee lived down in what was Gunner's Landing and is now Gunnersville Lake. Basically, the only thing Albertville was hunting ground, place you'd go out into the wilderness to harvest some chestnuts, mulberries, occasional thorns, sticks, firewood. It was a resource rather than just a place you lived. The villages were all in Gunnersville. Down there was civilization. It was where people had actual farms, housing, trade posts, networks, beautiful red housing. But I'm going to avoid looking back on my nostalgia of Cherokee history, but after a while, Andrew Jackson, back before the Indian Removal Act, when he was actually very friendly with the Cherokee, built up the old road up Gunnersville Mountain to better access this place and use up the land. Then settlers began to move up here. Now, fun fact about Albertville and Sand Mountain in general, our soil is sand. That's why it's called Sand Mountain. And you see, sand, not very good for farming. And on top of that, it's trees everywhere. Just trees. They are mostly pine trees that last hundreds of years, alongside back then some chestnuts, which were also very strong and sturdy, which real good if you want to use them for lumber or just eating chestnuts and using pine straw for whatever, mulch, maybe textiles, I don't know. But these people who were moving in, they wanted to farm the place. So living up here was very hard. And most people ditched farming for instead just hunting, living off the frontier wilderness and, the resources they had. These were the old Appalachian days. No real different from people living the same lifestyle as they were in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, the edge of the Carolinas. It was on the frontier. And the people who lived up here also were very reliant on the Cherokee early on because they were the main people in the area who you would trade with and live alongside. Now, the first settlers, they didn't always really like the Cherokee as they didn't always speak English, though many of them at this point were. They were also, not white. But what the Cherokee were is also not English, which, fun fact, a lot of the people who settled throughout Appalachia originally, they weren't English either. They were German, Scots-Irish, and other such. And many of those original settlers ended up actually liking the Cherokee a lot more than the Americans. And back in these days, the country was very spread out, sparse, open wilderness, so some of these people didn't consider themselves American, and many ended up considering themselves Cherokee after learning Salagi and living alongside the only people with towns, cities, and, food. And though at first the older generations among them didn't like the idea of intermarrying with the savages, the younger generation at the time accepted the Cherokee had knowledge of the land, buildings, access to the land and fresh water, and a lot of interesting cultural techniques that they continued on to this day. This is why many people throughout the Appalachians consider themselves part Cherokee, including myself. Even though genetically they are mostly white, the Cherokee offered them a free society with food, water, shelter, economic opportunities, a rich culture that welcomed them, and, was a very good thing. Many of them only traded with the Cherokee, though, mainly just living off of hunting and chopping down some of the trees up on the mountain to then carry down to the villages. But then the second stage of our history came in when Andrew Jackson decided he didn't like his Cherokee kin anymore and decided to evict them from an entire country. During the Indian Removal Act, at first, people on the East Coast cheered. Then a lot of people in the Appalachians started to freak out because the only people with trading posts and that had given them a sense of identity, helped them out, establish themselves, were now gone. And who was coming in? A bunch of these Dawn City dwellers coming off the coast and a bunch of immigrants moving in, setting up farms, who also were not only not Cherokee, they were also English and German, who they did not really like. And then a bunch of companies and stuff also doing stuff like mining and clear cutting and stuff, which unfortunately for the people living in Albertville, most of them aren't around today, those families, because the original 5 or 6, how many people you guys know all named Albert around here? Because those guys are gone. What happened to the Albert family, who built the original post office, trade posts, and such, is, well, eventually the Civil War happened. And here in Appalachia, it was less about slavery or even us really liking states that were fighting for the Confederacy or anything. It was just us really mad about the government and some of us wanting to associate ourselves more with the Cherokee. Though there was still a lot of racism and such, because though there were in Appalachia a lot of, well, it was also more about land loyalty. I'm not going to get into the Civil War, but either way, that caused the original inhabitants of Albertville to basically die out because the men went to go fight the war. Then, I think it was General Sherman, and then a bunch of Appalachians who didn't like the idea of slavery more than they hated the government, came down and, stole a bunch of stuff, burned a few farms, and then marched on to burn down Georgia. Which that caused a lot of the people living in these hills to, well, die out and then be replaced by people who moved in to just take on the burden of living on top of a mountain where the soil is sand and the woods are endless. Though many of the original survivors did remain, most that survived just left. Now, this generation, they moved in, and now people had rail lines and stuff, which transported fertilizer, so you could actually now farm the soil, and transportation via the river system and this new train line allowed for clear cutting and lumberjacks to make a living. Then a little later on, they built the school. This little period caused Albertville to kind of, develop more. It's also where Gullisville began to really hate us, as they now saw, well, the history of Gullisville was they were, originally, Cherokee settlements. The name Gullisville comes from the old trading post and town of Gunter's Landing, who the inhabitants there were either half Cherokee or Cherokee themselves, or just Scots-Irish living alongside the Cherokee. So then they see us, a bunch of basically Yankees who came and colonized the place, with some Southerners from the south and some other Appalachians and Cherokee, or people with Cherokee heritage, move in, and basically just build a city and steal the only school the state was going to build up in North Alabama. So yeah, they really hated us. And they started calling us mountain goats. We called them river rats, and that's where the rivalry got started. Now, during this period, Albertville was now an agricultural city, with people farming the land for both sustenance and their own gain. There wasn't really a wealth gap yet, but, people were making money, things were industrializing, we now had a school, things were looking good. Then came the 1910s tornado, which wiped everything out. It left the train depot and some survivors. Wrecked the school pretty bad, killed a lot of people. Mainly, Eric, Mr. Well, I'm not really sure why I'm calling him Mr. He was just a kid. Mr. Eric McCord, who we named the Rodents new football field after. And his ghost still walks around there all the time. And you can ask any resident around town, you still see that guy. I swear, he's still there. Same with also, that's why all the ghosts that like to live around Main Street, that's why they are there. And around this time is when Albertville got rebuilt with more immigrants and people coming in. And the older generation who live here, they were pretty mad that a bunch of newbies were coming in. Though that came after they rebuilt the town for them. And then also they tended to only hate the ones coming from, really far away or were different from them. And then they really hated when immigrants started coming in from other countries, like, mainly at the time, Mexico and Germany. This is also when my family moved in, but we came from Gadsden and were Cherokee, rather than just, immigrants, though we still were very different from the original population living here, and tended to associate kind of in the middle point. We weren't German, we had some German heritage, but we weren't Germans, at least not any more than the average white person. And we weren't Mexican, but we also weren't really these locals either. We were our own little thing. I'll go into the history of my family later, but my papa became a cop. Mama just walked in the textile industry in town, I believe, and a few other offices. But this is when the town of kind of modern Albertville kind of began to really become a city. The old timers of this remembered the agricultural era and such, Um, while the old timers of their generation remembered hunting and gathering and stuff, and the generation before that remembered uh, settling and warring with the Indians and such. Now, in this time, um, they uh, they now before this, the only people who really hated the new stuff and ideas and changing were the original people who moved onto the land and remembered fighting with Indians on the East Coast, or stories their parents and grandparents told them. And then the river rats, who still were predominantly Scots Irish Cherokee and German mix. While up here on the town, it was kind of a overall just average Alabama town with a population reflecting that of everywhere else. Now, the more modern Albertville, this generation ended up not hating their previous generation. They hated the new ones, and like more specifically people coming in, because this is also where the wealth gap began to emerge, because no longer was farming and agriculture as sustainable anymore, as land was becoming slightly scarcer. A lot of new factory, chicken plant, and uh, educational and shopping jobs were opening up, and this created a kind of class system as well, with the original inhabitants being a kind of the upper class, and the immigrants being more of the immigrants and newcomers being more of the second class. Now, this is also where at first racism and the darker bit of our history here in Albertville took place, but also where we began to develop. During the 70s and such, there was so much corruption in our police force. My papa ended up quitting and becoming a fireman. I wanted to stand for all the exploitation, extortion, and stuff. This is also when, like, all y'all who complain about Mr. Honey, y'all must not remember back then, because, like, everything you accuse him of being, the people back then in charge were doing. And they were doing it a lot, because at this point, a lot of money and people moved in, and there was a very large cultural and economic clash. Not a crash, just a clash. People were fighting a lot. Things were getting pretty bad. Now, what changed is eventually the, you know how back in those 1910s, a giant tornado just came out of nowhere and wiped out the town? In 2011, it happened again. This is also where I entered the story, as I was just a little boy hiding in that bathroom over there. When this came in, and it basically was the apocalypse. I'm surprised more of us don't have PTSD from that, because, like, well, actually, because in this, it goes into my nostalgia, because me growing up in this, I kind of liked it. It gave me a kind of sense of comfort and, like, safety, because I was living very close with my family in a tiny little room right over there, curled up like all cozy, and I got to go outside and explore a lot more. It felt fun, like I was on an adventure. The people who were adults in this time did not see it that way. They saw it as the entire town they lived in and their entire livelihood just got completely wrecked. The government basically abandoned us, and we had to rebuild a lot of stuff from scratch. And well, I think the government helped us a little bit. They gave money and sent FEMA and stuff, but mainly it was the private investors and stuff who ditched us, and our town had to come together. Every family, every group, no matter your age, your bigotry, or what, you had to come together, work with your neighbors, or we all die. And this is where the kind of well, what we now call the incumbents came to power, and Tracy Honey and a lot of the modern city council, they came in and they began to fix up the town and then develop it. Now, uh, Mr. Honey was a real estate agent. He was able to get a lot more land for the city, develop it well, and began putting in projects to, bring a lot more money to the city, helping to not only rebuild our school, but also expand it. More recently, building up AIA, the Albertville Innovation Academy, that is. Uh, then came the Sand Mountain Parks, and then came, still not came yet, it's coming, the Target, Home Depot, like all that stuff. And it has brought a lot more wealth and growth to Albertville. Now, all of this development and stuff also comes with the cost, as it has furthered the wealth divide, but also still eased the class divide. Now, there is still, in Albertville, we are a very diverse community, and I don't mean that, by race or ethnic group. I mean, we have a bunch of different people of very different traditions, cultures, religious opinions, and ideas, all living in the same place, and are slightly isolated from each other, so those ideas and such stay with us, stay with our families, and we stay pretty independent of each other. But we'll also, in Albertville, there's beginning to be more movement for unity, making all of us, kind of work together, assimilate into a more common culture. And us Aggies all still, every single one of those little houses and people all consider themselves Aggies first and everything else second, really. As in Albertville, here we all came together. We all still have that old hospitality and brotherly nature, and have made a city that is, richer, more hospitable than a lot of our neighbors, though there is still work to be done. Now, with economic development, that has changed a lot of the culture for the older generation, as now many of the people who remember those 70s and the good old days, and once, they remember that as, their childhood still. Those days might have been bad for, say, people like my papa and the first immigrants and stuff, but it was also, a time of adventure. It was a time when there were problems to be solved. They got solved by them. It was a time when there was a lot of opportunity in the chaos. And that is what built the town today. But that town was built up on top of all of the old town, which had problems, but to the old generation was their preferred way of life. Now, if you just give them back their way of life, that town that they had, they may change their opinions, though. Because back then, they were just kids. The world has changed, and so have they. And really, they're the ones, those people who are remembering that nostalgic past and actually lived through it, they're the ones who built it up for us. They created that liberal world that they now despise. They created all of those new opportunities throughout town. They created, the wealth gap, the poor conditions of many of the housing and stuff. Now, looking just back on the past ain't gonna change anything. Now, I myself am also guilty of this nostalgia, as I mentioned previously. I consider myself Cherokee. That may cringe out more of the pure bloods, as I am very, very pale, more so than the average European, actually. But that is still my culture, the nationality I identify with, and, I look back on those old history of those beautiful, idyllic villages on the riverside as the ideal time period. But that ideal time period is gone for a reason. People have changed. We can't really fully bring that back. Maybe one day we'll bring something back similar, but it's not going to be exactly the same. Just trying to bring back the time when we lived in clay huts on the riverside isn't going to work for us anymore. We've changed as much as the times have. Geography has changed. But I still also believe in the past having a lot of good examples and uses for us in the modern day. It's our history. It's what made us. It's where our identity comes from. We may have changed slightly, but it did not fully change us. At the very heart and core, we are still the same. This is still Albertville. The people who live here are still Aggies. Nothing is ever going to change that, because we will endure. So long as we fight for an Albertville, doesn't matter how much it changes, it's still going to be our home. Same with the rest of the country and such. Same with the rest of the world. No matter what happens, no matter what changes, we're still here. We're still alive, and we're gonna keep changing, because change is life. Things that stay the same, don't change, are dead. Only when a town is building up, evolving, is when there is life. It's why we look back on that past of the 70s and 60s as idyllic, because that was a time of change, a time when some ideas got left behind or put on the backwash, and some ideas got carried on into the modern day. And I'm not in favor of just completely forgetting the past or completely erasing it, or abandoning certain traditions. But I am in favor of embracing the new, but responsibly, with purpose, building off of the old rather than just flying everything and going forth. Because though that might satisfy the next generation, what if when they are old? What if when they are the conservatives? What example do they leave behind for the next generation? No. We must build off of the old. We must build off of what came before. Sure, there may have been mistakes. Sure, things and people may change. But we must accept that. And sure, maybe some of us youngsters have new ideas and stuff you don't really like. But, well, it's our world now. You made it for us. The only thing you can do is, well, slightly change your opinions. Give us a framework to work off of. And we will try our best to honor it. And then our next generation and the generations after that, they will look back on you. And maybe they'll pick up your old ideas. Continue on parts of your legacy we left behind. Maybe they'll do the same to us. Who knows? The only thing we can change is the present. Now, I've been James Tyler Epperson, Don DeGoa. I love you, Albertville. See you next time.